The bull that no one could touch was saved by a young rancher's determination. The moment Caleb saw Bramble crash into the steel fence, he froze. Dirt exploded from beneath the bull's hooves as the massive creature spun, head lowered, eyes wide with rage or fear. The heavy clang of metal shuddered through the pasture, echoing off the dry hills. Caleb didn't run. He stood there, boots rooted in the dust, hands at his sides, heart thudding so loud he could feel it in his throat. Bramble stared him down from across the pen, sides heaving. A deep gash above his right shoulder dripped blood from an earlier encounter with the enclosure. The beast's nostrils flared like storm vents. His black coat was slick with sweat, the summer sun turning it into a mirror of raw muscle and tension. Caleb slowly exhaled and crouched. He didn't say a word. For the 6th morning in a row, Caleb Rourke had returned to Bramble's pen just before dawn. And for the 6th time, he didn't bring a rope, a prod, or a tranquilizer dart. Just his silence. Bramble didn't charge again. He shifted slightly, grunting low, and retreated toward the back of the pen where the dry soil dipped beneath the shadows of an old cottonwood. Caleb took that as a victory. The first morning, Bramble had nearly killed him. Caleb had stepped too close, and the bull's horns missed him by inches. Everyone at the ranch said he was crazy to try again. But Caleb hadn't flinched. He returned the next day, and the next. And each time he sat just outside the broken fencing with his arms resting on his knees, his eyes steady, watching the bull like it was a campfire he couldn't look away from. He wasn't sure what exactly he was waiting for. Maybe a sign. Maybe for Bramble to blink first. Caleb's quiet persistence wasn't admired. His 2 older brothers, Wade and Darren, had made their opinions clear. The night before, Wade had slammed a half-full whiskey bottle on the kitchen table and growled, "You're risking the whole ranch for that monster. I won't stand by and let you sink what Dad built." Darren just shook his head and muttered, "10 days, Caleb. Then they'll put him down. You can't fix something that wants to stay broken." But Caleb wasn't so sure. He saw something in Bramble's eyes that no one else seemed to notice. Not rage, not madness. Memory. There was a sadness there, buried deep, but unmistakable. And that morning, for the first time, Bramble had hesitated. Caleb saw it. When he stepped into view, the bull hadn't lunged forward like before. His front leg twitched, as if pulled between instinct and something else. Curiosity, maybe. As the sun climbed higher, the dry grass crackled under the heat. Caleb finally stood up, dusted off his jeans, and walked the perimeter of the pen. That's when he saw it. A slight limp. Bramble's right hind leg trembled each time he shifted his weight. It wasn't just from stress, it was pain. Caleb narrowed his eyes and studied the movement. The bull was hiding it, favoring the leg only slightly, but it was there. Subtle. Consistent. He whispered, "You're hurting, aren't you?" Bramble looked at him for a moment longer, then turned away. That evening, back in the barn, Caleb paced in slow, anxious circles. His calloused fingers dragged along the edge of a wooden work table, thoughts racing. If Bramble was in pain, it would explain everything. The aggression, the wild energy, the violence. No creature fought like that without a reason. But if he was right, that meant something worse. The bull wasn't dangerous by nature. He was suffering. And the clock was running out. Outside, the wind kicked up a cloud of dust that drifted through the cracks in the barn wall. The distant sound of a truck engine made Caleb's stomach knot. Wade had invited the livestock inspector out again, and once that man returned with a written order, Bramble's fate would be sealed. The euthanasia had already been approved once. All it needed now was a time. Caleb slammed his palm onto the table. A wrench clattered to the floor. He couldn't let this happen. A few hours later, Caleb stood at the edge of Bramble's pen under a fading sky, watching the bull move restlessly along the far fence. A pale sliver of moonlight glinted off his horns. Caleb stepped forward, heart pounding. He didn't expect Bramble to let him get close, and the bull didn't disappoint. He growled low and stamped hard enough to send dirt flying, but he didn't charge, not this time. Caleb crouched again. "You've been alone a long time," he said softly, though he knew Bramble couldn't understand the words. "I know what that's like." He stayed there until the stars came out. The next morning, Mr. Grint stopped by. He was an old family friend, someone who had worked with their father for years before retiring. Grint stepped out of his truck with a long sigh and leaned against the hood, watching Bramble. "I heard Wade's got the sheriff coming by this week," he said, eyes squinting at the sun. "You really going through with this foolishness, Caleb?" Caleb didn't answer at first. He was spreading feed near the front of the pen, slow and even. Grint shook his head. "That bull's broken." "Always was. You know what they say about Bramble? The fence never held him. The hand never tamed him. It ain't just a saying." "He's not broken," Caleb said, his voice low. "He's wounded." Grint raised an eyebrow. "Difference?" Caleb met his eyes. "One can still heal." The older man sighed, tugged his hat down, and said, "You throw your life at him, son. You'll break too." Then he drove off. The words stuck like barbed wire. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He flipped through every old veterinary manual he could find in the attic. Some of them yellowed with age. None of them gave him the solution he needed. They were filled with terminology, diagrams, and treatments that required equipment he didn't have. But he remembered something else. Someone else. A man named Jasper Teal. Jasper had been a livestock surgeon who once stitched up horses during rodeo season. But after a barn fire left him burned and broken, he disappeared from Dryford life. Some called him crazy. Others called him dangerous. But Caleb didn't care what people said. He remembered being 10 years old, sitting on the porch with his father while Jasper talked calmly to a spooked colt until it settled. He remembered the man's quiet hands and thoughtful eyes. If anyone could help Bramble, it was Jasper. Caleb knew what he had to do. By morning, he was already saddling up his horse. The hills beyond Dryford rose like silent giants, and Jasper's cabin was somewhere past the third ridge. As he rode out, the wind whipped at his jacket and the early sun painted gold across the valley. Every step forward felt like a bet against the odds, but he had no choice now, not if he was going to save Bramble. The next 10 days wouldn't be about muscle or money or luck. They'd be about will, and Caleb Rourke was ready to give everything he had to prove that Bramble wasn't a monster. He was a survivor, and Caleb was going to make sure everyone saw it. But he had an idea, and he was about to risk everything for it. Jasper Teal almost slammed the door in Caleb's face. The old man's eyes narrowed through the narrow crack in the wooden doorframe, one hand gripping the edge like a lifeline. The smell of tobacco and stale hay drifted out of the cabin, mixed with the faint tang of burned cloth. Caleb stood motionless on the porch, shoulders squared against the cool morning wind that rolled down from the hills. He didn't flinch when Jasper's rough voice growled, "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying." "I'm not selling anything," Caleb said. His voice was steady but low. "It's about the bull." That stopped Jasper. The man blinked once. The wrinkles around his eyes tightened. For a few seconds, the door remained still, the space between them holding a breath of silence that pressed down like a heavy sky. Then, with a creak and a sigh, the door opened wider. Jasper stepped back. Inside, the cabin was dark except for the narrow lines of light bleeding through the blinds. Piles of old vet books, yellowed papers, and medical sketches lay scattered on every surface. In the far corner, a pot of black coffee bubbled over a rusted stovetop. A single chair sat beside a table built from mismatched boards. Jasper moved with a stiff limp. His left hand was mostly covered by a leather glove sewn at the fingers, the burn scars peeking out along the wrist. His right hand was steady as he poured a cup of coffee, handed it to Caleb, and motioned to the chair without speaking. Caleb sat. His fingers curled around the chipped mug, though he didn't drink. "I need your help," he said simply. Jasper leaned against the wall, arms folded, saying nothing. Caleb cleared his throat. "It's Bramble, the black bull out at our ranch." Jasper raised an eyebrow. "The one they want put down?" Caleb nodded. "He's not just angry, he's hurt. I saw it. He's favoring his hind leg. There's something wrong. I know it." Jasper stared at him a long time before speaking. "And you think I'm going to crawl out of my hole, risk my name, and treat an animal everyone in this county wants dead?" Caleb met his eyes. "Yes." Jasper scoffed and turned away. "Boy, do you even know what you're asking? I'm not licensed anymore. I've got no clinic, no supplies. The last time I touched livestock, it was before the fire. And you think they'll just let me waltz back onto your land like nothing's changed? I'm not asking for permission, Caleb said. Just help. Jasper paused, his good hand twitching at his side. Caleb stood. It's not about people. It's about the bull. The room went still. Even the coffee stopped bubbling. Jasper didn't look at him right away, but something shifted in his posture. He sighed, ran a hand through his thinning gray hair, and finally muttered, "Fine. But we do this my way." That night, they rode in under darkness. Jasper had bundled a few key supplies in an old vet bag, bandages, gauze, syringes, a plastic jug of homemade sedative, and a rough diagram of a leg brace he'd built out of harness straps and nylon. They didn't speak much as they moved along the fence line. The air was sharp and cool, the stars above flickering through patches of drifting cloud. At the edge of the pen, Bramble stood motionless in the shadows. His broad frame was barely visible, except for the slight gleam of his horns. Caleb moved slowly, heart hammering as he clicked his tongue, a soft, familiar sound Bramble now recognized. The bull snorted but didn't charge. Instead, he shifted his weight and limped deeper into the field. "Stay here," Caleb whispered to Jasper, who crouched behind a water trough and raised a pair of binoculars. His eyes narrowed. "Right hind," Jasper murmured. "Swollen joint, favoring the outside edge. Could be a fracture. Maybe old, maybe healing wrong. He's been compensating. That's why he snaps." Caleb watched the bull's slow steps. "Can it be fixed?" Jasper didn't answer immediately. He pulled out a piece of chalk and started sketching on a flat stone nearby. A diagram formed. Ligaments, bone position, weight distribution. "We'd need to keep the leg stable," he finally said. "Cold compress, some light sedation, maybe sling the limb. Let it rest while the bone resets, if it's not too far gone." Caleb looked up at the bull, who was now watching them from a distance. "And how do we get close enough to do all that?" Jasper sighed. "That's the part that'll get us killed." Over the next 3 days, they worked in secret. Caleb came before dawn and after dark, bringing fresh hay and calm words. He used soft whistles, slices of apple, and long moments of stillness. Inch by inch, he shortened the space between him and Bramble. By the 3rd day, the bull let him stand 10 feet away without flinching. Jasper didn't interfere. He watched from a distance, arms crossed, scribbling notes on scraps of paper. "The mind," he said once, "is harder to treat than the body." On the 4th night, the air was warm and still. Crickets buzzed along the tree line and clouds rolled in low. Caleb stepped into the field slowly, one hand holding the halter, the other near his belt where a tranquilizer syringe lay hidden in his pouch. Bramble saw him. The bull's ears twitched, but he didn't bolt. Caleb moved closer, 5 feet, then 4. Bramble grunted and pawed the ground, but his shoulders were still. Caleb felt the silence between them grow heavy and charged, like a string pulled tight. He took one more step. Then Jasper stepped out of hiding. The bull tensed. From across the pasture, a gunshot exploded into the night. "Caleb!" a voice shouted. "Wade." He stood on the hill with a rifle, eyes wide with panic. "You out of your mind!" he yelled. "That thing's a killer!" Bramble panicked. With a scream like thunder, he spun and rammed the nearest fence post. Wood splintered. Caleb dove out of the way as the bull thundered past, Jasper barely avoiding a direct hit. The bull skidded into the far corner, snorting wildly, eyes rolling with fear. "Stop!" Caleb shouted. "You're scaring him!" Wade charged down the slope. "Scaring him? You nearly got trampled, Caleb! What is wrong with you?" "He was calm until you fired. He was waiting to strike. He's dangerous, Caleb. You can't see that because you're too close." Caleb's chest heaved with frustration. "You don't know him." Wade's face twisted. "I know enough to call the sheriff." That night, everything unraveled. Wade reported an unauthorized vet on the property, said Jasper was a hazard, said Bramble was out of control. The sheriff promised to bring in a tranquilizer team at first light 2 days from now. Caleb sat on the barn steps that night, head in his hands. The stars above offered no comfort. Inside, Jasper was quiet. He worked at the table with his back to the door, sewing inside were 3 syringes. "If you trust him," Jasper said softly, "then give him a chance." Caleb looked up, his eyes wide. "But this time," Jasper continued, stepping back into the shadows, "you'll need to go in." Lightning cracked above the open pasture as Caleb stepped into the pen. The wind had picked up since sunset, whipping across the high grass and rattling the old fencing that marked the outer edge of the ranch. Every few seconds, flashes of white lit up the clouds above, revealing the hulking silhouette of Bramble standing in the far corner of the enclosure. Rain hadn't yet begun to fall, but the air felt heavy with it, like a breath being held. Behind the gate, Jasper stood hunched beneath his coat, one gloved hand gripping the splint and sling they'd fashioned from old harness straps and canvas. The makeshift brace was stitched with care, but crude enough to betray its urgency. He watched the boy with tired eyes, tense but silent. Caleb pressed forward, boots sinking into the dampening earth. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, matching the rhythm of distant thunder. Each step had to count. No sudden movements, no missteps. He clutched the syringe in his right hand, a mild sedative Jasper had mixed earlier that evening. It wasn't enough to put Bramble down, only enough to ease the pain and dull the panic. They needed the bull conscious but calm, aware enough to remember Caleb's presence but too tired to bolt. As he crossed the halfway point, Bramble turned to face him. The bull snorted, steam rising from his nostrils in thick bursts. His hooves shifted, one step forward, then another, his body lowered just slightly as if bracing to charge. Caleb froze. "Easy," he breathed, so soft the words barely left his lips. He held his ground, eyes locked with Bramble's. For one terrifying moment, all the progress they'd made seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. The storm cracked overhead, briefly illuminating the raw tension in the animal's posture. Then Bramble did something no one would have expected. He stepped back. Once. Then again. His ears flicked, tail twitching once before stilling. Caleb swallowed hard and took a single step closer. He knelt slowly into the mud, the syringe hidden loosely by his side. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the gravity of the moment. "I'm not here to hurt you," Caleb whispered. Bramble's head tilted slightly. His breathing slowed. Caleb inched forward, careful not to look directly into the bull's eyes. From 3 feet away, he could smell the sharp mix of sweat, damp hide, and the faint coppery trace of old wounds. He reached out slowly, inch by inch, and pressed the needle into the thick neck muscle, just below the ridge of Bramble's shoulder. The bull flinched but didn't bolt. Caleb held his breath, watching the slight shudder ripple through the animal's body. Then he withdrew the needle and backed away, heart pounding so hard he could barely hear the wind anymore. Behind the gate, Jasper gave a subtle nod and stepped forward, carrying the brace over his shoulder. 10 minutes passed. The sedative began to take effect. Bramble swayed slightly, then steadied himself. He didn't collapse. His eyes were still sharp, but his movements softened, less reactive, more measured. They moved in quickly. Jasper knelt on one side, his movements sure despite the stiffness in his burned hand. Caleb took the other side, gripping the harness and securing the straps beneath Bramble's belly. The bull shifted once, muscles tensing, but Caleb placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered again. "Just a little more." Together they raised the splint and began adjusting the sling, anchoring it to Bramble's frame while keeping the leg supported. It wasn't elegant, but it was enough. Enough to hold the limb steady while the joint recovered. Enough to prevent the old injury from fusing into permanent damage. The final strap clicked into place. And then, everything changed. Headlights sliced across the pasture, cutting through the night like blades of fire. A pair of truck doors slammed shut, followed by the unmistakable crunch of boots on gravel. Jasper's head snapped toward the road. "They're early," he muttered. Caleb rose to his feet, his clothes soaked with sweat and mud. He stepped in front of Bramble instinctively, shielding the bull from the sudden flood of light. Sheriff Randall stepped out first, his badge gleaming even in the stormlight. 2 deputies followed, one of them already raising a tranquilizer rifle. "Step away from the animal," Randall barked. "No," Caleb said firmly, voice shaking with adrenaline but never losing its clarity. "He's not dangerous. He's hurt. We can prove it." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "The order's been signed. You had your deadline." "We didn't ignore it," Caleb insisted. "We treated him. Look at him. He's calm. He's in a sling. You fire that tranquilizer now and he'll collapse wrong. It'll break the leg." The deputy didn't lower the rifle. Behind Caleb, Bramble stood quietly, chest heaving, but no longer thrashing. The storm rolled in closer now, the air pulsing with thunder and the promise of rain. Randall took another step forward. "You had no legal vet here. This is unauthorized, risking public safety." Caleb didn't move. "We weren't reckless. Jasper Teal was the vet. He used to train livestock specialists. He knows what he's doing." Randall frowned. "Jasper Teal? He's not licensed anymore. That man hasn't stepped inside a barn in—" "He trained the man who signed this." Jasper, quiet until now, stepped forward and held up a piece of paper. His hand trembled slightly as he extended it. "Emergency reprieve," he said. "Filed this morning. Signed by Dr. Boyd Fletcher. I taught him everything he knows. It's legal. And binding." Randall hesitated. He stepped forward and snatched the paper, eyes scanning it with suspicion. The deputies waited, one of them still holding the rifle like a coiled snake. The silence dragged on. Caleb clenched his fists. Every second felt like a verdict. Finally, Randall lowered the paper and exhaled through his nose. "If this checks out," he muttered, "you bought yourselves 3 weeks." The tension drained from Caleb's body so fast he nearly staggered. Jasper looked up at the sky. A droplet of rain hit his cheek. Then the heavens opened. Thunder roared overhead as the first sheets of rain came down in heavy bursts. The deputies turned back toward their truck, shielding their radios with their jackets. Randall gave Caleb one last look, something between a warning and respect, before disappearing into the storm. Caleb stood soaked, boots caked with mud, arms limp at his sides. Jasper stayed beside him, watching as the water soaked through his hat and dripped onto the field. Behind them, Bramble didn't panic. Instead, the massive bull lowered himself slowly to the ground and rested his head near Caleb's boots, breathing slow and even. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The storm rolled across Dryford like a curtain, but in the middle of it, on a field of soaked earth and broken odds, something had changed. That night, word began to travel. Some in town said Caleb had been reckless, putting lives at risk, siding with a wild animal. Others whispered that what he'd done was different, brave even, but Caleb didn't care what they said. He knelt in the rain beside Bramble, laid a hand gently on the bull's broad shoulder and closed his eyes. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time it didn't feel like he was losing. And Bramble, scarred, tired, but alive, was finally safe. 3 weeks later, the morning sun painted the pastures of Dryford in soft gold, and for the first time in months, Caleb didn't wake up afraid. The days of storms and threats had passed, but their memory still lingered like footprints in the mud. He stood at the edge of the east field, arms resting on the top plank of the reinforced fence, watching Bramble move through the tall grass. The bull's limp was gone. His stride was solid now, slow, measured, powerful. He no longer lunged at shadows or charged at the wind. The rage that once boiled inside him had settled into something calmer, something rooted. Bramble wasn't just healed, he was whole. Every morning and every night Caleb came to the field. He didn't carry ropes or tools, just a worn wooden brush and a quiet voice. He spoke to Bramble the way someone speaks to an old friend, with patience, warmth, and no need for answers. Bramble would walk to him without hesitation, nuzzle his shoulder, and stand still as Caleb brushed away the dust and dried sweat from his coat. The once feared bull, now a silent shadow that followed Caleb wherever he went, had become more than livestock. He was a companion, a symbol, a reminder of everything Caleb had fought for. The town noticed. It started with the mailman. One morning, he paused his truck at the gate, watched the bull wander peacefully behind Caleb, then muttered, "Well, I'll be," before driving off without saying another word. Then came the reporters. Word had spread past Dryford's borders. Whispers about the wild bull tamed by a boy caught the attention of 2 news stations from neighboring counties. Their trucks rolled up with cameras and eager questions. Caleb met them at the gate. "Sorry," he said, his voice calm but firm. "He's not a story. He's family." They didn't argue. They just filmed the field from a distance and left. Jasper declined every request for an interview. He answered his door only once, and when the man from the newspaper asked him what happened out at the Rourke place, Jasper simply replied, "The boy listened when no one else would." Then he closed the door and went back to his workbench. Caleb didn't speak much about what happened either. He didn't need to. Dryford had eyes, and they saw enough. One morning, as the sun burned off the last of the fog, Caleb found Wade standing by the fence. His older brother didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at Bramble, watching the bull walk along the fence line and pause beside Caleb. Finally, Wade cleared his throat and muttered, "I was wrong." Caleb looked at him and gave a single nod. That was enough. The official orders were lifted a week later. The Livestock Association had sent 2 inspectors for a surprise visit. Jasper had stayed on the property that day, quietly overseeing Bramble's movement. They'd watched as the bull responded to Caleb's commands, walked without pain, and stood still as Caleb checked the healed leg. The inspection lasted 2 hours. The final report was only 2 pages. The euthanasia order was dropped, and the state seal was printed at the bottom of the letter with one simple phrase: "Rehabilitation successful." A few days after that, a quiet envelope arrived in the mailbox. No return address, just the official seal of the Branch County Sheriff's Department. Inside, a folded piece of stationery with embossed lettering read, "Mr. Rourke, upon review of recent events and in light of new information regarding the veterinary intervention provided, we extend our formal apology for any undue stress or interference. Respectfully, Sheriff R. Randall Caleb read it once, folded it back, and placed it on the shelf above the fireplace. He never mentioned it again. The ranch was no longer on the brink of sale. Wade had backed down from the idea after seeing what the land meant to Caleb and after realizing what it meant to Bramble. The fences were repaired, the fields expanded, and Caleb's days returned to the rhythm of early mornings, quiet labor, and slow sunsets. But something had shifted. Every so often, strangers would drive by the road and pause to catch a glimpse of the black bull with the strong gait and calm eyes. But none of them got close. Bramble allowed only one person within reach. That bond, built on trust and struggle, had been forged through something deeper than control. It was understanding. Jasper stayed for a while longer, helping with final adjustments to Bramble's treatment, and writing down everything he could remember from his years as a livestock surgeon. One evening, Caleb came into the barn to find a thick notebook resting on the workbench. Its cover was worn, and inside were sketches, diagrams, and notes written in a sharp, steady hand. Techniques for calming distressed animals, homemade remedies for tendon inflammation, even a page titled Bramble Method, a study in patience. Jasper left the next morning. Caleb watched his old pickup truck disappear into the hills, dust trailing behind. The cabin beyond Ridgeview Creek would be silent again, but Jasper had left more than his tools. He'd left knowledge and faith. One evening, just as the sky turned the color of rust and gold, Caleb sat at the edge of the pasture, boots planted in the grass, arms draped over his knees. Bramble stood nearby, grazing with slow, thoughtful bites. The fence posts caught the last rays of the sun, casting long shadows across the field. Without a sound, Bramble approached. Caleb didn't move. The bull came to his side, lowered himself with a grunt, and rested his massive head beside Caleb's boots. It was not a gesture of submission. It was something more, a quiet trust, a bond unspoken. Caleb reached out and ran his fingers over the thick fur behind Bramble's ears. "You did good," he whispered. There were no crowds, no applause, just the sound of wind rustling through the grass. In the weeks that followed, the name Rourke Ranch began appearing in conversations across the county, not because of breeding numbers or auction prices, but because it had become something rare, a place where the impossible had happened. People began calling, asking for advice. Some wanted help with spooked colts or stubborn oxen. Caleb didn't turn them away. He didn't pretend to be something he wasn't. He just listened, like Jasper had once done. Some said the bull had been tamed. Others argued that Caleb had simply found a way to speak his language. But those who knew better, those who had seen the way Bramble moved, the way he watched Caleb with quiet eyes, understood it was something deeper, a kind of mutual rescue. Caleb had saved Bramble, yes, but Bramble had saved Caleb too. The boy who once doubted his place in a world built on strength had found his own kind of power, one rooted in patience, loyalty, and a refusal to walk away from something worth fighting for. As dusk rolled across the hills and the last of the sunlight faded, Caleb leaned back against the fence and looked out over the quiet fields. Bramble grazed just ahead, his coat catching the final glow of evening. And Caleb smiled. Determination, he had learned, could change everything.